Camila spent years hearing that she needed to be more like her sister. Look how sweet Marina is. Marina always thinks about the family. You need to learn to be more generous, Camila. The comparisons started in childhood and never stopped. While Marina was the daughter who received encouragement, affection, and unconditional support, Camila learned that if she wanted something, she would have to get it on her own. That was how she grew up, working twice as hard, saving every cent, and giving up luxuries to build a stable life. The day she signed the papers for her apartment was one of the few moments when she felt genuine pride. It was small, but it was hers. A space built through years of sacrifice, where she could finally live without needing permission or justification. But that feeling didn't last long. When Marina announced her engagement, the whole family celebrated as if it were a collective victory. Her fiancé came from a traditional family, full of connections and with a respected name in the legal world. To their parents, this wasn't just a wedding, it was an opportunity. This marriage could open doors for all of us, their mother repeated whenever she could. The problem began when Marina, who had always had everything handed to her, realized that the wedding of her dreams would cost far more than she had. The luxurious venue she wanted wouldn't rent for less than $80,000, not to mention the decorations, catering, and all the other extravagant details she insisted on having. That was when someone suggested the perfect solution. Camila could sell her apartment to help. You can buy another one later, their parents said, as if they were asking for an insignificant favor. When Camila refused, the collective disappointment was immediate. Marina was offended. She called her sister selfish, ungrateful, and jealous. It's just money, Camila. Don't you want to help your family? Camila had expected disappointment, maybe even frustration, but she hadn't anticipated the full-force guilt trip that followed. Her mother sighed dramatically, her father shook his head in disapproval, and Marina stormed out of the room, calling her selfish under her breath. The next few days were unbearable. Every conversation somehow circled back to her refusal. Her mother reminded her, over and over, how much Marina had sacrificed for the family. She always thought of us first, Camila. You should learn from her. It was absurd. What sacrifices? Marina had never struggled for anything a day in her life. And yet, here they were, acting as if she was owed something simply because she wanted it badly enough. The pressure intensified when Marina started playing the victim. She cried to relatives, exaggerated the story, twisting the narrative until Camila became the villain who was ruining her special day. Family members started calling, urging her to reconsider. Some were subtle, saying things like, "It's just a wedding, Camila. Don't be so bitter." Others were more direct. One aunt even accused her of being jealous of Marina's engagement. The worst part? No one ever asked how Camila felt. No one wondered if selling her apartment would leave her struggling. They all just assumed she'd do it because that's what she had always been expected to do, put herself last. Camila stopped answering calls. She muted family group chats. Every time she opened a message, it was the same thing: guilt, pressure, manipulation. It was exhausting. But through it all, she noticed one thing: no one had even thought to ask her if she could afford to help. They just assumed she was in the same financial position as before, struggling paycheck to paycheck. What they didn't know, because they never bothered to ask, was that Camila had spent the last few years building something for herself. While they were busy dismissing her, she had been working. She had saved. She had invested. And she had built something bigger than they could ever imagine. The irony was almost laughable. The very wedding venue Marina wanted so desperately, the one she had begged, cried, and manipulated for, belonged to Camila. It was hers. Every brick, every light fixture, every detail had been chosen by her. It wasn't just a business investment, it was the proof of everything she had fought for. She had poured everything into that space, late nights, early mornings, every extra dime she could spare. And now, the same family that had spent years overlooking her wanted to use it. Without even realizing who it belonged to. Camila let them talk. Let them plan. Let them believe they were getting exactly what they wanted. But she already knew how this story was going to end. Marina had no idea. She pranced around, telling everyone how perfect the venue was, how it would impress Gustavo's family, how she had finally secured the wedding she deserved. Camila watched from the sidelines as her parents gushed over Marina's choice, acting as if it was fate. It's the best place in town, her father had said proudly, as if he had any role in its existence. Gustavo's parents were equally pleased, nodding approvingly when they visited the space. Elegant, sophisticated, his mother murmured. Marina beamed. She had one. Or so she thought. Camila remained silent. She let them schedule the final meeting, let them prepare to sign the contract. It was almost comical, her own family sitting in her office, negotiating the price with her assistant, completely unaware of who actually owned the place. She sat in the back, watching them talk about her business as if she were a stranger. They were about to learn the truth in the most humiliating way possible. And the best part? Camila didn't have to do anything cruel or vengeful. All she had to do was stand up and tell them the facts. When the moment finally came, Camila didn't rush it. She walked into the meeting room calmly, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Marina was too caught up in her excitement to notice. At first, she was flipping through the contract, barely skimming the details, already talking about the floral arrangements and lighting adjustments she wanted. Gustavo, ever the composed lawyer, was reading carefully, nodding in approval. Their parents sat across the table, looking smug, as if they had secured an exclusive deal through sheer influence. Then, Camila pulled out a pen and slid the contract back toward them. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said evenly. Marina frowned. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice laced with impatience. Camila tapped the name on the contract, the one listed under owner. Marina's eyes skimmed over it, confused at first, then wide with shock. Her mother's face went pale. Her father stiffened. Gustavo's parents exchanged glances. Camila gave them a moment to process it. Let them sit in the weight of their own ignorance. Let them feel the sting of realizing that the sister they had dismissed, ignored, and used as a backup plan was the one holding all the power now. Marina let out a forced laugh, as if trying to dismiss the entire thing as some bizarre coincidence. "Wait, what? This must be a mistake," she said, flipping through the contract again, as if the name would magically change. But it didn't. The reality was staring her in the face, undeniable and humiliating. Her perfect wedding venue, the one she had paraded around as her ultimate triumph, belonged to the sister she had spent years belittling. "No," Camila said, her voice firm but calm. "It's not a mistake. This is my venue. I built it. I own it. And I'm not hosting your wedding here." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her mother was the first to react, shaking her head, as if she could somehow will the situation into being different. "Camila, don't be ridiculous," she said, her tone sharp with desperation. "You can't do this to your own sister." Her father chimed in, his voice lower but no less insistent. "This is a family matter. Let's not make a scene." Gustavo, who had remained silent until now, finally looked up from the contract, studying Camila with a mixture of curiosity and something else, respect, maybe, or doubt. Whatever it was, the smug certainty in his posture had shifted. Marina, however, wasn't ready to accept defeat. "You're joking," she spat, her face turning red. "You're seriously going to ruin my wedding over some petty grudge?" She looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to back her up. But no one spoke. Her parents looked shaken, Gustavo was unreadable, and his parents, who had once been so approving, now seemed uncomfortable. Camila didn't flinch. She simply leaned back in her chair and pulled out her phone. "You want to talk about petty," she said, tapping her screen a few times before setting the phone down on the table. A series of messages appeared, every cruel text Marina had sent her, every passive-aggressive remark, every moment of entitlement. Her mother gasped. "Camila, that's not necessary, it is," Camila interrupted, her voice steady. "Because for years, I let all of you talk over me, decide what I should do with my life, take things from me like I owed you something. But I don't. I never did." She looked directly at Marina. "You didn't even bother asking me for help. You just assumed I'd give up everything because that's what I've always been expected to do." She exhaled slowly. "But that ends today." Marina's hands clenched into fists as she stared at the screen, her breath coming in short, angry bursts. The room was eerily silent, the weight of her own words now working against her. The texts were brutal, mocking, dismissive, dripping with entitlement. Messages where she called Camila bitter and jealous, where she laughed about how she could convince mom and dad to make her do it anyway. Even messages where she bragged to friends that she would get that venue no matter what. Gustavo's eyes flickered over the words, his expression tightening. His parents shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that Marina didn't seem to notice. She was too busy grappling with the realization that the image she had carefully constructed, the sweet, devoted daughter, the perfect bride, was crumbling right in front of her. Their mother, desperate to regain control, reached across the table, trying to shut off the phone. "Enough, Camila," she hissed, her voice strained. "We don't need to air family matters like this." But Camila didn't move. She had spent years swallowing her feelings, letting herself be pushed aside, convinced that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for herself. "Not today. You didn't think it was family matters when you pressured me into giving up my home," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You didn't think it was family matters when Marina insulted me over and over again. But now that the truth is inconvenient, you want to stop?" She shook her head. "No. You all need to hear this. You need to understand exactly why I'm saying no." Marina's face twisted in frustration, her desperation bubbling to the surface. "So this is revenge? You're just trying to humiliate me?" Her voice was shrill now, her composure slipping away with every second. But Camila didn't rise to the bait. She had no interest in revenge, only in drawing a clear boundary that should have been respected a long time ago. "No," she said simply, looking her sister in the eye. "This is me choosing myself for once." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything else that had been said. Gustavo exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. His parents remained stiff, their previous warmth toward Marina now replaced with an uncomfortable detachment. Camila could almost hear them reevaluating everything they had been told about the woman their son was about to marry. Their father finally spoke, his voice unusually quiet. "Camila, be reasonable. This wedding is important for all of us." The same argument. The same justification. The same expectation. That she should sacrifice everything just to make life easier for everyone else. But this time, she didn't cave. "No, Dad," she replied. "It's important for Marina." And instead of working for it, she just assumed she could take from me like she always has. She gestured to the documents on the table. "You all thought I was the same girl who would roll over and do whatever was asked of her. But I'm not. And I won't." She stood up, smoothing her dress, her hands steady. "This conversation is over. The venue is not available for your wedding. You'll have to find somewhere else." Marina looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She turned to Gustavo, expecting him to defend her, to take her side, to smooth things over like he always did. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with a newfound detachment. "Did you really say all of this to her?" he asked, nodding toward the phone still on the table. His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone, something that made Marina's panic flare. "She's exaggerating," Marina stammered. "You know how sisters are. We fight, we say things we don't mean," but Gustavo wasn't buying it. His parents certainly weren't either. The respect, the admiration they once had for her was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. Their mother, sensing the shift in power, tried one last desperate plea. "Camila, please," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "We're family. We need to support each other." Camila let out a quiet laugh, not because any of this was funny, but because the irony was too much. "Where was that energy when I was struggling? When I had to build everything on my own while you handed everything to Marina?" Her mother flinched, but Camila didn't let up. "You only care about family when it benefits you. But I'm done playing that role." She grabbed her phone, slid it into her pocket, and turned toward the door. "I have a business to run. This conversation is over." Marina shot up from her chair, her hands slamming onto the table. "You're making a huge mistake," she snapped, her voice shrill with desperation. "You think you're punishing me, but you're only proving how selfish you are. No wonder no one ever put you first." The word stung, but not in the way Marina had intended. Years ago, that kind of accusation would have broken Camila, would have made her question herself, would have made her give in just to make the guilt stop. But not anymore. Camila turned slowly, meeting her sister's furious gaze. "You're right," she said, her voice even. No one ever put me first. So I finally learned to do it myself." The weight of those words settled over the room like a thick fog. Marina's confidence cracked, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Gustavo exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck, clearly embarrassed to have been dragged into this mess. His parents were already inching toward the door, their body language making it clear that they wanted nothing to do with this disaster anymore. Their father sighed, shaking his head like he had just realized how little control he actually had over the situation. And their mother? She just sat there, staring at Camila as if she were a stranger. Maybe, in a way, she was. Because the version of Camila they had always known, the one who would sacrifice herself for their approval, was gone for good. Camila didn't wait for anyone to respond. She had spent enough of her life waiting to be heard, waiting to be valued, waiting for her family to see her as more than just an afterthought. That waiting was over. Without another word, she picked up her bag and walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished floor of the venue she had built from nothing. Marina stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides, her face contorted in a mix of anger and disbelief. Their parents didn't move either. It was as if the weight of what had just happened was too much for them to process all at once. The illusion of control, of entitlement, of everything always working in Marina's favor, it had all shattered in a single conversation. As Camila stepped outside, the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the city. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, feeling lighter than she had in years. Behind her, she could hear the murmurs of disbelief, the tense whispers between Marina and Gustavo, the awkward shuffling of feet as her parents tried to figure out what to do next. But none of it mattered anymore. She wasn't responsible for their reactions, for their disappointment, for their sudden realization that they had underestimated her. She had done what she needed to do. And now, she was free. As she walked toward her car, her phone buzzed with a message. For a split second, she considered ignoring it, expecting yet another desperate plea from her mother or a passive-aggressive jab from Marina. But when she glanced at the screen, she saw an unexpected name, Gustavo. "I didn't know about any of this. I'm sorry." Short, simple, but telling. Camila didn't reply. Not because she was angry at him, he wasn't the one who had spent years pushing her aside, but because it wasn't her problem to fix. He would figure it out on his own. If he hadn't already started questioning the kind of family he was about to marry into, he would soon. And that wasn't her burden to carry. She slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't leaving a conversation feeling drained, defeated, or unheard. She had stood her ground. She had refused to be manipulated. And most importantly, she had proven, to herself, more than anyone else, that she was more than just the overlooked daughter, the convenient option, the backup plan. She was successful. She was independent. And she didn't need their approval anymore. As she pulled away, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, a quiet, satisfied smile spread across her face. Days passed, and the fallout was exactly what Camila had expected. Relatives called, some trying to guilt her, others just fishing for gossip. Marina, humiliated and furious, refused to speak to her, but that wasn't a loss. If anything, it was a relief. Their parents, after initially lashing out in frustration, had gone quiet. Maybe they were too ashamed to face her. Maybe they were still processing the fact that their lesser daughter had outgrown them. Either way, Camila didn't waste time worrying about it. She had a business to run, clients to meet, goals to reach. And unlike them, she wasn't stuck in the past. One evening, as she locked up the venue after a successful event, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass doors. There was something different in her expression, something she hadn't noticed before. Confidence, peace, freedom. For years, she had carried the weight of her family's expectations, bending herself to fit a mold that was never meant for her. But now, she had let it go. She had drawn the line and walked away without looking back. And that, she realized, was the best revenge of all, not proving them wrong, not humiliating them, but simply living her life on her own terms. News about the fallout between Camila and her family spread quickly within their social circle. Some distant relatives whispered about how cold she had been, how ungrateful it was for her to refuse to help her own sister. Others, however, reached out privately, offering quiet words of support, people who had also been the overlooked siblings, the ones expected to sacrifice without question. Camila didn't engage in any of it. She had spent too many years explaining herself, trying to be understood by people who never cared to listen. She wasn't about to start now. A few weeks later, she heard through a mutual acquaintance that Marina's wedding had been drastically scaled down. The lavish event she had envisioned had crumbled under financial reality. No grand ballroom, no designer floral arrangements, no over-the-top spectacle. Just a simple ceremony at a mid-tier venue, one that didn't hold the same prestige Marina had bragged about for months. Camila wasn't petty enough to celebrate someone else's disappointment, but she couldn't ignore the poetic justice of it all. Marina had spent her whole life believing that everything would be handed to her, that she could manipulate and guilt her way into getting whatever she wanted. This time, life had told her no. And that, more than anything, was the real lesson. Camila never reached out after that. There was no need. She knew exactly how the story would go. Her parents would continue to pretend nothing had happened. Marina would spin the situation into a version where she was the victim, and life would move on. And that was fine. She wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. She wasn't expecting them to change. For the first time, she understood that true peace didn't come from making others acknowledge their mistakes. It came from walking away without needing them to. Months later, as she sat in her office reviewing new booking requests, she realized something. She was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. Not because Marina had failed, not because her parents had finally seen her worth, but because she had chosen herself. She had spent years waiting for the people who should have valued her to recognize her efforts, and when they didn't, she built something greater than their approval. Her success wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to herself that she was always enough, even when they refused to see it. One evening, as she walked through her venue after another fully booked weekend, she took a moment to just stand still. The warm lighting, the elegant decor, the faint echoes of laughter from earlier in the night, it was all hers. Not borrowed, not handed to her, not something she had to beg for. Hers. There was a time when she had craved recognition from her family, when she had thought that success would feel empty if they weren't there to see it. But standing there, in the space she had built from the ground up, she realized something crucial: she didn't need them to see it. She saw it. And that was enough. As she locked up and stepped into the night, she thought about the past, about the girl she used to be, desperate for approval, eager to please. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had fought for everything she had, who had refused to be a footnote in someone else's story. She didn't leave with bitterness, with resentment, or with any need for revenge. She left with freedom. Because in the end, the best kind of justice wasn't humiliating those who had underestimated her, it was living a life so full, so completely her own, that they became nothing more than a distant memory.